Good day, Africa, and welcome to another exciting edition of AAU Talks. And today we are bringing a special edition because we are streaming live from the University of Ibadan, where we are participating in the pedagogical leadership. But we have a special segment of AAU Talks, and we will be hosting the Dean, Faculty of Education of the University of Ibadan. And it's going to be interesting. We are discussing inclusive education in Africa. We have been talking about inclusive education for some time now, but we want to find out whether our universities are still practicing inclusive education or it is just a lip service. Don't go away, stay tuned, go for a short break.
Anyone can get an education, but not everyone gets quality education. It's never too late to acquire it. The University of Lusaka, a modern private university located off Alikinkata Road in Lusaka, Zambia, offers undergraduate, master's and PhD degree programs in the School of Business and Management, Law, Economics, Banking and Financial Services, Public Administration, Governance and International Relations, Education, Engineering and the Built Environment, and Health Sciences. Our curriculum is practical and designed to meet the changing needs of employers, business and society. Because at Unilus, we make students think outside the book. Our driving force is a passion for quality education. We build graduates fit for purpose. Enroll now for January or June intakes. For more information, log on to www.unilus.ac.zm.
Welcome back from the break. If you just tuned in, you are watching AAU Talks, and this is a special edition coming to you right from University of Ibadan in Nigeria. And like I said, where we are participating in the pedagogical leadership training, and we are privileged to have in our midst Professor Ademokoya, and he is the Dean, Faculty of Education, and we are discussing, or we will be discussing, inclusive education in Africa. You are welcome to AAU Talks, Prof.
Thank you very much.
Prof, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I believe you are doing so too.
Great. So how do you say welcome in your language?
Equitable.
Equitable. Okay, so Prof, equitable.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are privileged to have you on a series, and most importantly, there's one specific, I don't want to say ideology in higher education, but it is one of the things that we want to do, bringing on board brothers and sisters who have special needs and making sure that our education system is inclusive enough, most especially looking at the SDG Goal 4, which talks about the fact that we need to have everybody on board. No child must be left behind. We should all make sure that everybody is educated. How are the universities in Africa, and for that matter, University of Ibadan, embracing this concept and making sure that the university is inclusive enough?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me state clearly from beginning that University of Ibadan happens to be the first university in Nigeria to have or establish the Department of Special Education.
Okay.
Now, and you know, when we talk about special education, it's categorically, you know, a field of education carved out to take care of people who have special challenges or special needs. Well, most of the time people think about the disabilities and so on, but let me also mention that when we say somebody is special, it means generally we have an individual who, either by the reason of being too exceptionally brilliant, gifted, or talented, or a genius, or has disability that doesn't allow him to perform or function as average individuals do. So there is a need to devise or develop special education for that fellow, you know, to meet the challenges provided by his needs or, you know, peculiarities rather. Now, having said that, it's also expected for a university which started the first Department of Special Education in Nigeria to also take the leadership role in ensuring that when we talk about inclusive education, this university is also in the front leading others.
Okay.
And good enough, let me say that the university is trying, you know, as far as that is concerned, because now we have other universities in Nigeria that are also, which have special education departments. And so they are also trying to make sure that their programs, not only in the departments, not only in the faculties, but also in the universities, are inclusive. Now, what is meant by inclusive, or inclusiveness, or inclusive education, whichever way you take it, is that you have an educational program which provides opportunity for all. Now, different international conferences at different fora have established the principle that nobody should be left behind.
Absolutely.
We have education for all. Okay? Now, what we are saying is that nobody should be discriminated against on basis of disability or being too exceptionally brilliant. Now, if that be the case, democracy says you do not discriminate.
Sure.
So, the idea of creating special schools, special classes for a group of people, secluded, removed from where the general group is undemocratic.
Okay.
It's discriminatory. All educational programs, so to say, must be done in such a way that somebody who has the challenge of hearing impairment, is accommodated. Somebody who has the challenge of sight, visually impaired, must be accommodated. Somebody who has problem of mobility should be accommodated. And how do we do that? Is that our curriculum is adapted, or reviewed rather, to adapt them. The teaching personnel or care personnel must also be reviewed to accommodate them. The classroom must be restructured. The environment must be restructured. Everything has to be reviewed and restructured to make it inclusive. Now, when we say inclusive then, like I mentioned, restructuring means teachers may have to be retrained.
Absolutely.
So if you have been trained, for instance, to take care of sighted people, well, you may have to be trained a bit of how to handle, provided there is no specialist that will join you in the classroom.
Lesson.
Yes.
Okay.
At least to handle them to some extent. But then the real issue is that both regular teacher and special teacher must be put together, trained together, stationed together, and they provide complementary role in inclusive classroom.
Okay. But Prof, you know, it's very important when you run a special school. You know, we have the individualized education program, which is geared towards the student's capacity, his or her abilities and everything, and teaching becomes very specific. But in terms of the inclusive setting, where you have a blend of all students with various abilities, doesn't it make teaching very difficult? And for that matter, those who have special needs tend to suffer. For example, we visited universities where it's let's say a general program like law. We have students who have problems with sight, still in the same classroom with their colleagues who have the ability to see, people who have the difficulty in hearing, still in the same classroom with people who have the ability to hear. And there is no special services or devices given them to cope. But we are saying that we are practicing inclusive education. To me, it's like we are still not there yet as higher education in Africa.
Yeah, sincerely speaking, most of African countries, higher institutions are not there yet.
Sure.
You know, compared to what happens in the West, you know, European countries and so on. But again, we are moving. And as a specialist, I do tell institutions or people that, well, if you say you are practicing inclusive education, you are not yet there. But the good thing is that you are making some move.
Okay.
Now, there is a difference between what we call inclusive education and an integrated
education.
Education or integrated classes. Now, you also need to understand the background of special education.
Absolutely.
That's when we have special education without inclusive education or mainstreaming or integration, is that
or segregation. Whichever.
yes, we have segregated schools where it's just meant for people with disability.
Absolutely.
It could be a special school for people with sight issues or hearing issues or mental issues and so on. So they are separated. But then 1980, there was a move, in special education, and we call it mainstreaming or integration. It was the second stage, of transition, from segregation. And the idea then is, okay, bring them close as much as possible. So you have an environment, for instance, if we say this is University of Ibadan, and we have school for, able-bodied individuals, then you also look for not too far a space, and you build,
a center,
their classroom or center for them, and you say, okay, stay there. At least you have been brought from 2 miles or 3 miles away. So that is, a bit of integration. But inclusive, say, in the same learning environment.
That is very difficult.
Well, difficult, but not really difficult.
But possible.
Possible. Thank you very much. Possible. Difficult because it's a new ideology we are just catching with rather in Africa. So we have not been able to really get the whole concept, what it means in real practice of it. Okay. Again, when you talk about inclusive education, it requires a lot of money.
Absolutely.
And also it takes time. For instance, retraining of the staff. Okay. Now, reconstruction of buildings, classrooms, libraries, clinics, and so on, because they have to be reconstructed. Okay. Ramps have to be built. Okay. Facilities must be provided.
Absolutely.
So much money is needed. Okay. And you also know how rich many African countries, or the shortage of funds and the problem, that it is posing to African universities. So those are the things that appear to make it difficult. But in countries that is wholly committed, not just paying lip services, where money is provided, where the cultural challenges are taken care of. Because again, I've never even talked about the cultural challenges. Let me mention, a particular incident to you in Nigeria. Some years ago, there is a particular school not too far from, University of Ibadan campus here, across the road there. The state government then decided that they wanted that school to be an integrated school. They brought some students with hearing impairment, what we call deaf students, to come and stay in the same environment. Cultural issue. Some parents withdrew their hearing children just because they can't imagine their hearing students going to the same school with the deaf. So it's a cultural distinction.
Absolutely.
The teachers have their own concepts, misconception. Up to now, there are still some Africans who believe that if you interact so much, especially you are a childbearing lady or a teacher with pregnancy, if you interact so much with deaf, your own child might. Okay, so that's, some teachers still have that mindset. Perception. You understand? So other issues are there. What about allocation of funds? The idea is you give the best available to regular school, and if there is anything left over or crumbs, you throw it to. But unfortunately, it is the special needs education or special schools or inclusive school that requires more fund than regular school. Because of challenges you have mentioned. Providing necessary teaching aids, facilities, amplifying devices and so on, working.
So, Prof, so in University of Ibadan, are you practicing integration or inclusiveness?
Let me say, to some extent, inclusive education, because you mentioned law class the other time. Now, we have students with sight or hearing challenges that stay in the same classes, attend lectures together with their colleagues.
Okay.
You know, able-bodied colleagues. Now, what we've done, or what the university has done, is to employ sign language interpreters.
In the same classroom?
Yes. So while the lecturer is teaching, you have beside him, or somewhere very conspicuous for whoever has hearing problem to see, is sign language interpreter interpreting what is being said verbally to the one with hearing problem.
What about the blind?
It is now, of course, the blind doesn't have much problem with hearing, but he goes to his classroom
with a braille, or
not necessarily braille. Well, he goes to the classroom with recording markings and so on.
Okay.
So when the teacher is, lecturer is speaking, he's recording. So when he goes back to his rooms and so on, he plays back and listens to the lectures afresh. But then again, let me also mention that having absolute inclusive education may not be possible in some circumstances, because no matter what, we still have some category of special needs individual who, for whatever reason, may not be brought to inclusive class.
Sure.
For instance, we have some bedridden individuals, some with spinal cord injuries, then some with other challenges. So we have what we also call least restrictive environments. In other words, as much as possible, those categories can be allowed, to enjoy a bit of inclusive education, but it may not be, and that is why most of the time you also have resource rooms, where they withdraw to, even when they go into inclusive
the
class.
mainstream, they go.
Yes, they still go back there. All this talk. I mean, they tell you how capital intensive, inclusive education is indeed. It requires a lot of money. But I think all put together, the social, academic, and integration it brings about is quite very wonderful. Because it's being seen as a bridge, linking up the gaps between the able-bodied individuals and those with disabilities.
Okay. So
it's creating an inclusive society.
Okay.
And please bear also in mind that inclusiveness is not restricted to education alone. There is social inclusion. There is also environmental inclusion. There is political inclusion. There is employment inclusion. There is also health inclusion. Okay. Now, take for instance the environmental inclusion. It means all government buildings, banks, and even individual buildings must be reconstructed. Ramps must be built to create access. Okay? So when you have a bank, for instance, there is ramp, for somebody on the wheelchair to go in, not that somebody stays outside and begins to beg clerk or somebody
to carry them,
either to carry him or to collect his or her money for her. He goes there. Ditto for public libraries and so when all these things are being done, you will really have an inclusive society. So that's why we say most of the time that inclusive education itself may not be an end, but a means
to
an end.
Okay. So Prof, we'll go for a short break, and when we return, we want to find out whether African universities are ready, or how will we be able to ensure that in the next few years we practice what we call inclusive education in its proper sense. Viewers, you are still watching AAU Talks, and this is a special edition brought to you by the AAU, and we are streaming right away from the University of Ibadan, where we are participating in the pedagogical leadership training for African universities. Stay tuned. We'll be back.
Why University of Ilorin?
I chose the University of Ilorin for a number of reasons. One of them is the fact that the university has a very conducive environment. It provides students with a proper academic environment.
I chose the University of Ilorin because of the good culture they try to imbibe in students in the aspect of improving their morals and also in the aspect of improving their dressing in terms of decency.
It feels good knowing that your 4 years is 4 years and your 5 years is 5 years. Unlike a number of schools in Nigeria where your 4 years course might last 5 years, 6 years, or even 7 years in some extreme cases. But University of Ilorin, better by far, your 4 years course is 4 years course. And it feels good knowing that after 4 years, I'll be rounding up my session. That's one of the things I really love about this university.
Welcome back from the break. You are still watching AAU Talks, and my name is Kwesi Sam, and we are hosting Professor Ademokoya, who is the Dean, Faculty of Education, University of Ibadan, and we are discussing inclusive education in Africa and whether or not African universities are really practicing inclusive education. So, Prof, before we left for the break, we were discussing the state, more or less, what really happens in our universities, whether we are practicing inclusive education or it's just a lip service. But from the narration, we get for a fact that we are somewhere, but there is much more for us to do. Now, I know you are an expert in the field and you visited a lot of universities in Nigeria, and you would be able to tell that we are not there yet. What will it take for us in terms of policy, in terms of the educational leadership in our universities? What will it take for us to really hold the bull by its horn and practice inclusiveness in our universities? From providing academic services to domestic, in terms of accommodation services like hostels and other services as well in the university.
Yeah, thank you very much. To start with, is not, we cannot say categorically that African universities are practicing. Neither can we say they are ready. Yeah, because again, a lot of factors must be considered.
Absolutely.
Okay. The first is that how many African universities really have provisions and programs for people with special needs? The percentage is very small.
Yes.
So if you don't have programs or provisions for them, you can't just be talking about inclusive or inclusive education or inclusiveness or inclusion or whatever. So the starting point is that every university, or let's even start from, lower level of education. In America, for instance, there is what we call neighborhood school, which is contrary to what we do here. Neighborhood schools mean in every environment or every town, or what to say, there must be at least one school, either primary or elementary or secondary, that has provision for special needs learners. Okay? At least one. And there are encouragements. For instance, even if it is a private school, whichever private school has provision and programs for learners with special needs, get some incentive from the government.
From the government, okay.
We don't have a policy as regards that. So far, so good. The only statement we regard as policy in Nigeria is when, what is stated in the Nigerian National Policy on Education that says that the government adopts inclusive education as the best option for teaching or educating people with special needs. But then that is just a statement, because we do not have necessary backups. Now, when I say we do not have necessary backup, for instance, there is nothing legal, no legislation to say school A or school B must make provisions and programs
For people with,
for learners, students, pupils with special needs. Nothing like that.
okay,
So if I stand up today to establish a school and I say this school is purely meant for able-bodied candidates, government cannot.
Okay.
The highest we have just had about a few months ago when the president passed the discrimination bill is about making sure that buildings, public buildings and
Sure.
you know, in certain public institutions and so
accessible.
on, you know, are made accessible.
sure.
But again, that has just come about 2 months ago. Compliance to it means that individual institutions, you know, must now begin to restructure their buildings to make it accessible. That again depends on time
Funding.
and funding. Okay? Now, back to what I'm saying. Until when the policies are backed up with law, enforcing it will be a problem. So, in America, for instance, when you go to the history, recently you know, from my own personal research, I found out that there were almost about more than 100 litigations, you know, forcing different organizations, groups, schools, and so on to make provisions.
For such category of people.
Yes. So inclusive education over there didn't just come in a matter of days. It spanned through so many years.
Okay.
Now, we don't have such in many African countries. So if we are talking about inclusive education, just because now we travel, you know, or we hear the West is doing it, Europe is doing it,
So we also
a
must.
bit of it is being done in Asia and so on. And, you know, we are a consuming nation. Sorry, sorry to use the word. We consume food from there. We also consume ideas and knowledge from there. But we have failed to recognize that America didn't just arrive at inclusive education overnight. It's something they have,
Systematically then.
you know, done and reached. And at the point of reaching it to say, now we have a policy, and the policy is inclusive education. They have also gotten everything required. Political will, legislation, cultural change, human manpower, materials and everything ready. But we are just starting from making the statements.
Okay.
So,
Prof, from the academic point of view, when you look at the student enrollment and vis-a-vis students who have special needs, it tends to show or indicate that a lot of them find themselves in the humanities because that is maybe a bit relatively comfortable for them. But then in an era where we are talking about STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, I mean, when you go to the hospitals, hardly would you find a medical doctor who is, let's say, blind, or a medical doctor who has a hearing impairment, then will be able to help people who have such issues. Hardly will you find lawyers, hardly will you find engineers, hardly will you find people with disability in these areas. Yet we are still talking about the fact that, oh, our universities are inclusive. What will it take us? Is it a matter of fact that universities wouldn't want to open such disciplines to them, or we don't have what it takes to train them in those fields?
yeah.
And until we've done this, I think we've not gone anywhere.
Yeah, the issue is there are certain facts we have to accept. Number one is that you mentioned people with hearing impairment or visual impairment tending towards humanities or arts and so on. We need to understand that most of them, is not that they do not possess, you know, intellectual capacity to read medicines and so on.
They are
But
very
they
brilliant.
are restricted by their specific disabilities.
Okay.
Okay, take for instance, let me mention it to you that we have detected among people with visual impairment very high capacity
IQ.
of intelligence.
Sure. Which is
They are
true.
more concentrated than even the sighted
Sure.
that have been distracted by so many factors. You
On
understand?
campus, sure.
But you see, how can a fellow with blindness assess a patient physically?
It's possible.
How?
I don't know how, but
I'm not saying it's not possible, but again, a lot of things will have to come in.
Absolutely.
You understand? Starting from the training to the field of practice. Do you understand?
Sure.
But that will also take time. Don't forget, we are developing nation. We are just developing. That is if we are really developing. Over there, training allows for, because there have been researches and there are also resources and there are also personnel.
Prof, you know,
We don't have that
there is
here.
always partnership. If, let's say, University of Ibadan is ready to open the medical school to students who have such needs.
Yes.
When you go to America, there are a lot of universities which have that kind of resources that can offer support to partnership.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
It's not a fact that we ourselves, we are not ready to push them a little further, or we are not ready to open
You
them up a little
see, it
further.
is the priority. Don't forget special education and all concepts under it, including inclusion. You know, it's relatively new. So now, the priority so far in many African nations is on able-bodied person. Maybe like, you know, the issue of economy or funding, you know, when you don't have sufficient. We talk about girls' education. We talk about challenges some groups are having. Why is it that a particular sex, for instance, receive education?
Sure.
Why should ladies or girls go to Hawk to bring money to send male children to? Cultural and priority. Cultural issues and priority, you know. But like I'm saying, you have mentioned a possibility, you know, collaboration. Where if, for instance, students with challenges which my university, for instance, may not be able to take care of in terms of training. If they can go to Manchester University, for instance, you know, because I know my department here and Manchester, you know. So it's an area we can explore. Okay. But again, back to what I'm saying. We have challenges in training them presently in Africa, you know, to train them in medicine, to train them in science and so on. That challenge is there. But you see, like I'm saying, again, an area we have not really overcome is some of them having good IQ to do those things. But our classroom, our facilities, our personnel are not prepared to do that. For instance, a few years ago, Debo, that was the fellow, did JAMB and scored very well. In fact, he was admitted to read medicine at the University of Ibadan. But then we found out he's having hearing impairment. He was a deaf, he's a deaf fellow. Now, how does that fellow listen to stethoscope? To, you know the heartbeat and so on. So we had to call him, counsel him to change medicine to pharmacy.
Prof, you know now, we don't need a stethoscope to check the heartbeat. There is a machine where if the person can't hear, sees it and then is able to read.
Fine.
So,
but
Prof, I think this is a very interesting...
How many of those things are available now?
So what I'm saying
Who is training?
These things are possible.
They are possible.
If we want to do it,
yeah,
we will be able to do it.
Time.
Okay.
And if you want me to add seriousness on part of the government and universities administrators.
Okay.
Funding, serious challenge. If the government is committed, like I mentioned, priority. Is inclusive education priority of any African country? I will say no.
All right. Prof, thank you very much. My producers are telling me time is up, and I think it's been a very interesting discussion and a good conversation never ends. We believe that we'll have another chance where we'll explore these areas and make sure our universities take the bull by the horn and do what is needful. Thank you for coming on AAU Talks. Viewers, this has been AAU Talks, and I believe the discussion has been interesting and thought-provoking. Our prime aim is to make sure that our universities practice inclusive education just as we have on paper. My name is Kwesi Sam. Thanks for watching.